Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the sagas of the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. In each episode, we choose a saga, explore the story and its themes and its historical relevance, and then we judge the actions of its characters at the Saga Thing.
And we just want to start quickly by saying thank you to those of you who have rated and reviewed our podcast on iTunes.
Absolutely. Those kind words are very much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I have absolutely no idea about iTunes and podcast promotion in general.
No, you can barely work your PC.
It's true. But despite my ignorance, I do know that podcasts rise and fall according to their ratings. So the more we get, the better off we'll be.
Exactly. We'd love to see this thing grow, and you guys can help make that happen by rating the podcast, leaving comments, and telling your friends about us.
Right, and just think about how cool you'll look when you tell all your friends about how your favorite podcast is a survey of the Icelandic sagas.
Maybe don't phrase it that way. You know, I think you should mention Vikings. That always gets everyone's attention.
Oh, right, sure. Well, Vikings have a way of doing that.
Indeed, they do.
All right, on to business.
Okay, it's great to be back.
Yes, it is. We are kicking off a new academic year with all that entails.
Yeah, syllabi, a little bit of lesson planning, lots of grading. There's exams, article writing, department meeting.
Okay, this is just getting depressing. My point was that we're also back in our podcasting chairs and ready to record another saga. Have we got an exciting one this time out?
Indeed. Let me hit this button and you'll find out. In this episode, we follow Hallfred the Troublesome-Poet, whose lusty ways with women and his sharp tongue force him to abandon the comforts of home. With his lover Kolfinna engaged to another, he journeys far and wide. In Norway, he becomes a follower of King Olaf Tryggvason, and by extension a follower of Christ. The saga tells of Hallfred's struggle to balance his heathen past with his Christian future. Along the way, he manages to gouge out some eyes, fend off a corpse, marry a stranger, and even make love to the beautiful Kolfinna again. Will her husband Gris take it lying down, or will Hallfred get the better of him again? Find out as Saga Thing takes on the Saga of Hallfred the Troublesome-Poet.
Hallfred saga, huh? All right, I'm reasonably excited.
Try to contain yourself, John. He's a troublesome
No,
poet.
I'm looking forward to this. Hallfred's a weird one, and I think we're going to have some fun with him. Mm-hmm. This is, I would characterize it as a love story with a twist. It's a poet, his rival, the woman they love, and the proselytizing Norwegian king who turns out to be the poet's true love.
His true love? Really? That's what you got?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not the first person to notice that Hallfred is more interested in King Olaf Tryggvason than in the lovely Kolfinna. Paul Schock says that Olaf's personality dominates Hallfred from their first encounter until the end of the poet's life. And he argues that the story of Hallfred's conversion is actually the point of the story. The love story is just kind of tacked on.
The love story between Olaf and Hallfred?
No, the love story between Hallfred and Kolfinna.
Oh, okay. I just want to be clear.
See, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's true. But, of course, the author doesn't necessarily intend for the saga to be read as part of a group of poet-warrior sagas like we're doing. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's no reason to think that he's operating according to genre expectations at all, which I think we should be careful of, noting with all the sagas we do.
Yes, exactly.
Hallfred's saga is kind of out there on its own. And I guess in some ways we could say that it reads almost as a commentary on the themes of sagas like Cormac's saga, the other warrior poet sagas.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. And there is the argument that the author of this saga is writing an intentional parallel to King Olaf's own saga. Mm-hmm. Right, so he does have a theme in mind or a framework in mind, but it's not the framework that we sort of think of this saga as occupying.
That's true, and we actually see bits of this story told from other perspectives in Olaf's saga in the Heimskringla.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And Sigurður Nordal made this argument some time ago, and a number of other saga scholars have followed his logic. And now we're moving dangerously close to the book prosist line of argument.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
we want to get on to things.
Let's get to the actual story.
Yeah, sure. There's just time for me to tell you that this saga is another of our briefer ones, weighing it at a slender 10,640 words, or 1.16 Hrafnkels sagas.
That's almost exactly what Gunnlaug's saga is, wasn't it?
Almost. It's good memory. This one's only a few hundred words longer.
Well, these warrior poet sagas are kind of throwing off the curve. What are we going to do when we get to something long like Njal? I keep wondering about this. Njal, Loksdala, Ale saga, these really long ones.
Well, for one thing, we won't be able to waste time on chit-chat.
Well, why don't you get started then?
All right. So our story begins with a Viking raid on a defenseless farming community on an island off the Norwegian coast.
Well, no. It actually begins with a Well, it does. It begins with a family tree centered on the father and grandparents of Hallfred, who's going to be the main character.
Okay, who's starting this thing? You told me to get started. Besides, all the sagas begin with a family tree. This one dives right into the action by establishing a raid only a few sentences in. This is as close to in medias res as the sagas get, and I'm not going to waste the opportunity.
All right. But before you carpe diem, I'm just going to note that the saga author introduces us to Thorvald the Discerning, his wife Thorgerd, their son Ottar, and Thorvald's illegitimate son Thorkel Silver.
Okay, but then there's a raid.
Hang on just a second. It's important to note that Ottar isn't living... Am I saying his name correctly? Ottar?
I was going to say it closer to Otter, but
Otter?
It's fine. Doesn't matter.
I'll go with Otter. You know, we don't know how to pronounce anything. It's important to note that Otter isn't living with his parents, since he's being fostered by Ingjald, a neighbor on the island, who has a son of his own named Avaldi. How do you say that one?
Avaldi. Not like it's a spicy meatball.
Okay. All right. He's got a son named Avaldi.
So is there anything else you need to add?
Well, just that Otter has an uncle Galti who lives on the mainland, and that's probably going to be important later.
Okay, are you happy now?
Well, it's all established in the beginning. Lay some groundwork that we need.
Okay. So, there's a raid. There's a Viking named Saki who attacks Thorvald's farm. He's a particularly nasty sort of Viking, and he goes in for burning people alive in their homes. He torches Thorvald's house after exchanging a few words with Thorvald, and 16 people die in the attack and burning.
Now, it's been a while since we racked up a body count like this in the saga's first pages. 16 all at once?
Yeah, I know. And since we never hear from them again, we can probably assume that Otter's mother and half-brother are among the dead. So we've got a classic tale now of a young man out to avenge his family.
Now, we haven't talked much about this, but Viking raids weren't just a problem for the rest of Europe. Men like Saki weren't too particular about where they raided, and attacking a farm in Norway really saved a lot of travel time. And,
True.
And gas money.
Right.
Yeah, so Scandinavians had to deal with this sort of thing, too.
Right, but Saki seems to be totally sociopathic. He next raids Ingjald's farm, where he refuses once more to allow anyone out of the house before setting it on fire. Ingjald grabs Ottar and Avaldi and shoves them out a secret exit before the fire engulfs the house.
Wait, no. Why doesn't he go with him? He's got an opportunity, obviously.
It's an excellent question. This seems to be one of those fate moments that we see sometimes in the sagas. Ingjald believes it's his time to die, but he thinks the boys have better luck and fates in store.
Well, that luck seems to come into play right away. The boys do get away. They manage to find a ship and leave the island. And then they sign on to a herring boat to make their way south to where Otter's uncle Galti lives. See, I told you we need to know that stuff.
There you go.
So they live with Galti for about 8 years, and they grow into promising young men. And Otter even takes part in the battle at Fitjar, where King Haakon dies. Eventually, they take to the seas. They spend a few years trading between England and Norway, and then they decide to move to Iceland. But before they go, they're going to want to have revenge for what happened to their fathers.
Well, it's about time.
Well, it definitely is. By my count, at least a dozen years have passed since the burnings, and these two have been grown men for at least half that time.
Well, you know what they say. Revenge is a dish best served over a decade later. Right. I mean, it's not like their plan is particularly complicated. Like, it took a decade to plan it. They just send a co-conspirator named Stein to drink in Saki's house with Saki and his friend Soti.
Are they drinking sake?
Possibly. Saki with Saki?
Yes. Yeah, Saki and Soti drink sake.
Then... after Stein gives presumably they're drinking sake out of Stein's. When Stein gives them the signal, Otter and Avaldi rush into the house, kill Saki and wound Soti, and run out again. It's clever. It's hardly Edmond Dante level stuff.
Nice Count of Monte Cristo reference thrown in there.
Thank you.
I love it. Yeah, I don't think what happens to Soti can be dismissed as a mere wounding, though.
Well, okay, but I mean, it's not like it's a big killing.
They cut his buttocks off.
Okay, it is pretty nasty.
They cut him off. His butt. Tux.
I know. And undoubtedly we'll revisit that in Best Bloodshed.
We better.
Until then, Sati will be standing around waiting for us.
Poor guy. Well, he's not going to be sitting, that's for sure.
Right, exactly. For now, although it's not an especially clever plan, it works. Saki's death angers Gunhild, the Norwegian mother of kings, and we're going to see her again later.
Oh, so many names already. I bet
I know,
everyone listening is going, I don't know what's going on.
Right. You should have your pen and paper out already.
Yeah, you need to be doing the genealogy along with us.
For now, though, Ottar and Ivaldi emigrate to Iceland and settle in Vatnsdal, where they both raise families. Ivaldi has a beautiful daughter named Kolfinna, while Ottar has sons named Hallfred and Galti, and a daughter named Valgerd.
Yeah, the saga author now digresses for a bit to tell a story about Valgerd, Ottar's daughter. She catches the eye of Ingolf, the son of Thorstein the Gothi. More names for you. Mm-hmm. Now, fans of the sagas will know about Vatnsdala saga, and Thorstein is an important member of the central family from that saga.
Yeah, I've always thought of Vatnsdala as being one of the more underrated sagas. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, me too. But this is just sort of an extended cameo, which is why you can't choose him as Thingman. And Ingolf is kind of insolent to Ottar, and he writes a love poem to Valgerd, which is always controversial. Well, this prompts Ottar to summons him. Now, Ingolf's family connections are pretty hard to beat, and although Ottar wins the case, he's forced to accept a judgment that includes having to relocate his family to a completely different part of Iceland.
Right, but before the relocation can happen, there's this inconvenient affair to deal with.
Of course there is. Now, this wouldn't be a poet saga without love poems and affairs, would it?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of an odd one, though. Ottar's son, Hallfred, has fallen in love with Kolfinna and visits her regularly, but he doesn't want to take a wife. For obvious reasons, this makes Kolfinna's dad, Ivaldi, uneasy, and he and his friend Mar arrange to introduce Kolfinna to an accomplished adventurer named Gris Samingsson.
What's that all about? I mean, I don't understand what the problem is with Hallfred. There's a pretty clear indication that everyone would be content if he just married Kolfinna.
I think it creates an interesting dynamic in the story, and I think it really sets Hallfred apart from the other warrior poets. Unlike Gunnlaug in our last episode, or Bjorn, or Cormac, or any of them, Hallfred has a clear opportunity to marry his love, and he just refuses to do so.
Well, as you said earlier, his true love is going to be King Olaf.
Well, we don't know that yet, of course.
He knows it in his heart, though. Right,
there you go. He's waiting for his one true Christian king.
Yeah, there's a pious king waiting out there for him somewhere.
With dreamy blue eyes. So, Gris, Mar, and a group of their friends visit Ivaldi's farm to discuss the marriage match. But while they're there, Hallfred stops by to see Kolfinna and notices the pile of weapons left outside the house by Gris's party. He deduces that they're there because one of them is hoping to marry Kolfinna, and of course, he's not happy about it.
That's a lot of deducing. So Kolfinna has some of the same problems with the lack of free will that we talked about with Helga the Fair and Gunnlaug's saga. But she's definitely not the complacent, near-mute that Helga was. She tells Hallfred to leave the matter to those with the right to decide it, but then sits with him outside a room and starts kissing him in full view of anyone passing through the door, in or out. Quite forward.
Seriously. While Hallfred's busy getting to first base, Gris completes the contract with Ivaldi for Kolfinna's hand. And as he's leaving, he spots the couple making out and asks who they are.
Probably asks where her hand is. The first impression is that he just doesn't know them, which is actually true. He hasn't seen either of them before, and that includes his now fiancée. But the whole truth is more interesting. Gris is nearsighted, and he really can't tell what's going on at any distance.
I love that detail. That's got to be a serious problem for him. I mean, it's kind of funny, but, you think in this culture, that's got to be a very serious problem.
As a glasses-wearing medievalist, I've often wondered if I got sent through a time portal. I haven't actually wondered this. But now I do. If I was sent through a time portal to some distant land, or if we had the apocalypse and I'm wandering around, if my glasses break, I'm in big trouble.
I think you've probably got a lot of other problems at that point.
I'm worried about my glasses.
I have to say that I think a moment like this makes me wonder why this kind of thing doesn't come up more often in the text.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably nearsightedness, glaucoma, macular degeneration, general vision deterioration with age had to be a problem for a lot of people.
That's true.
But it's striking how rarely something like this comes up.
Well, it does come up with Ale, right? Ale becomes blind.
True, absolutely.
In his old age. But again, then maybe that's the glaucoma thing or something. But
right.
Well, why don't we try to do better than Gris's eyes and stay a little bit more focused here? We've got a lot to cover still.
Okay, fine. Ivaldi tells Gris that it's Kolfinna and Hallfred out there, and that it's Gris's problem now to deal with Hallfred.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ivaldi's so eager to get Kolfinna hitched, mainly because he wants Hallfred dealt with. So it actually works out pretty well for him that they're all there right away.
Yeah, but Gris doesn't rise to the bait at first, and so he heads to his horse to ride away.
But Hallfred's not going to let it go. He taunts Gris and threatens to be his enemy, and then composes insulting verses about both Gris and Mar. He calls Gris a fretting old pantry dog. The anger of the busy bucket sinker, a true pansy, all heathen, is about as terrible to my eyes as if fair-sized, outside, worst of all when guests arrive, at the pantry door, an aged pantry dog fretted. Which is really quite nice turn of phrase.
Yeah, and astoundingly, Gris still doesn't react. He remains quiet. But when Hallfred rides off with his cousin Olaf, Mar and Gris take their 7 men and chase after them.
Yeah, I thought they only had 5 others with them.
No, Ivaldi sends 2 extra young men along with them.
Okay. All right, well, so Ivaldi is just openly interested in getting Hallfred killed at this point, I think.
Yeah, although I have to say, I see his point. I mean, the band of armed men might be a little excessive, but Hallfred's behavior with Kolfinna is really problematic.
Well, yeah, he was a bit
well, I mean, yeah,
forward with
it's
her.
bad enough that he's been courting Kolfinna with no intention of marrying her, and this provocation of Gris in Ivaldi's own homestead is certainly a provocation to Ivaldi as well.
Well, he got the reaction he was looking for, but he's not actually prepared for the consequences very well. I mean,
No.
Gris's men catch up to Hallfred and Olaf, and they surround him on a hillock. There's a fight, but the 2 men are quickly captured.
Captured?
Yeah.
Are you sure it doesn't say anything about their bloody deaths?
No. It turns out Gris is quite reasonable, and despite the fact that Hallfred was making out with his fiancée right in front of him, he merely binds Hallfred and Olaf up.
It's disappointing.
Well, it's a good thing for him, as it turns out. Hallfred's father, Otter, and 30 other men ride up to them immediately afterwards, and since Hallfred wasn't harmed, Otter lets Gris go after extracting a promise of self-judgment against him, and when Otter unties Hallfred, it's clear that Hallfred's in no mood to be reasonable and grumbles about challenging Gris to a duel as soon as possible.
Well, I mean, at least he understands some constraints of the warrior-poet tradition. I mean, dueling is practically a requirement for these guys.
But Otter gets word of Hallfred's plan and has him recaptured and trussed up again, refusing to let him go until he agrees to leave Iceland for a good while.
That's just good Icelandic parenting right there. Yeah, I mean, he only learns about the plan because good old cousin Olaf narks on him. And you could make the argument this is a little harsh. I mean, in effect, Ottar is imposing minor outlawry on his own son.
True, but under the circumstances, it's not hard to see why Otter would want to get Hallfred away from the area for a while. Oh, and meanwhile, Kolfinna and Gris get married at Mar's farm. I heard it was a lovely occasion.
Well,
But
there you go.
we are told that Kolfinna doesn't have much affection for her husband.
Yeah, but I mean, that whole story goes on the back burner because now it's time for Hallfred to go wandering in
Actually, you
exile.
could say that Kolfinna's on the back burner for pretty much this entire saga. I mean, of
Yeah, you
all the
could.
warrior poet sagas, this one seems least interested in the romance angle that dominates the others. It's really more about a poet's relationship with a king and the bond of friendship that unites them. So it's kind of like a bromance.
Okay, yes. I mean, we last time, I think with Gunnlaug, we did talk about a romance at one point, but maybe we were being misleading. This is the true romance of the
Yeah,
saga.
it's almost like he started writing this thing and thought it was going to be a romance, and then got into the travels part and was like, this is a lot cooler, a lot more fun.
Right. I mean, and when we say bromance, obviously with fewer college frat hijinks than that usually implies.
Yeah.
But essentially, that's what this is.
snapping towels and such.
Exactly. Hallfred spends a few years traveling and building a reputation as a poet and trader, and one day he learns that Olaf Tryggvason has taken control of Norway and brought Christianity with him. Hallfred and his crew devise a test to get a sense of this new religion. They put to sea, and they'll let the wind guide them. If the winds blow them to Sweden, they'll make a huge donation to Frey. Frey is one of the gods, a fertility god, for those who are unfamiliar with the pantheon. If they're blown to Iceland, they'll give money to Thor and Odin. But if the ship is becalmed, they'll go to Norway and let King Olaf decide what they should do.
Which, in this context, pretty much means converting to Christianity.
Sort of, but nothing's ever that simple with Hallfred.
Well, at first he's got to land safely, and there's a contrary wind in the harbor at Trondheim, and Hallfred's ship is in trouble. A ship approaches, and its owner is a green-cloaked man who calls himself Ankerfluk, and he helps to guide them in safely.
Ankerfluk? Seriously?
Yeah, sure, why not? Ankerfluk. Anyway, this turns out to be a fake name, if you can imagine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, it's a fake name. Hallfred,
okay.
Hallfred actually learns later that the green-cloaked man was none other than King Olaf Tryggvason.
Ah. So, this king of Norway, who's trying to convert all Scandinavia to Christianity and hold off the armies of Sven Forkbeard,
Yeah.
is spending his spare time disguising himself under a ridiculous name and rescuing incompetent sailors.
Yeah, it's good to be king, you know? Gotta hang out in the harbor.
I'd say this might go a long way toward explaining Olaf's death later. I'm guessing his opponents weren't busy trying to pretend to be a nautical superhero in their spare time.
Is that what he's doing? All right, well, we'll get to his death eventually. Spoiler. So, Hallfred offers to convert to Christianity, but on the condition that Olaf agrees to support him no matter what in the future, and that Olaf himself serve as Hallfred's baptism sponsor. I mean, this whole episode, it's available in Heimskringla. If you go to King Olaf's Saga,
right.
you'll see this whole thing played out, and it's quite interesting. Hallfred's only a minor character in that one, though.
Right. I mean, in some ways, yeah, the saga is sort of breaking out one of the supporting roles from Olaf's saga into a full-blown story.
That's right.
And I have to say, this is actually a fairly crafty move by Hallfred, because it sets up a very powerful man, Olaf, as godfather to Hallfred, and it forges a real bond between them.
Right. I have the impression that Olaf is just bemused by this guy. He's so audacious that Olaf just goes along with his request to see what will happen next. Mm-hmm. But Olaf takes the godfather role seriously, and he sets his brother and uncle to teach Hallfred Christian doctrine. It is the creed of the sovereign of Sogn to ban the sacrifices. We must renounce many a long-held decree of Norns. All mankind casts Odin's words to the winds. Now I am forced to forsake Freya's kin and pray to Christ.
He also likes to set up these little tests for Hallfred.
Yeah.
At one point, Hallfred composes a praise poem about Olaf, and as thanks, Olaf gives Hallfred a sword without a sheath, and tells him to keep it uncovered for 3 days without anyone getting hurt.
Hallfred returns the favor, though, by continuing to praise the Norse gods. I mean, Olaf insists on verses praising God, but Hallfred intersperses them with compliments to Odin, Freya, and all the other Norse gods.
Right, and at first all the tests turn out okay. Hallfred takes good care of the sword, and Olaf likes the more Christian of Hallfred's poems. So everything's going fine.
But it's not going to last. It never does. Hallfred gets into an argument with Otter and Kalf, two brothers in Olaf's retinue, and he kills Otter. Why do they got to have a guy named Otter? We've already got one.
I was going to say, we should be clear that this is a different Otter.
Yeah.
But it should also be pointed out, he kills Otter, but not with the sword he got from Olaf.
Good boy. No, he uses an axe that he once received from Earl Haakon the Powerful.
I like the symbolism there, actually.
What's that?
Hallfred uses a weapon with pagan associations to kill this guy.
That's true.
While avoiding blooding Olaf's sword on one of Olaf's own followers. That's a savvy move.
Maybe, but maybe not a smart one either. Hallfred is.
I never said Hallfred was smart.
Yeah. Once again, Hallfred is put into chains, and Otter's brother Kaf demands that he be executed for having killed a man in the king's chamber. So when Hallfred is brought before the king, he reminds Olaf of his promise to support him, and that Hallfred is his godson. Oh, it's another savvy move.
It is. Yeah, Hallfred's turning out to be a little smarter than I originally expected him to be. He's actually a nice change from Gunnlaug in our last episode.
Well, he's not off the hook yet, you know. As part of reconciling himself to Olaf, Hallfred has to compose a verse with the word sword in every line of the poem.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a good poem, which is fortunate for Hallfred because it isn't.
Yeah. Well, it's not so bad. The poem he comes up with is this. One sword among swords has made me sword rich, for brandishing yards of swords. Sword plenty now there'll be. There would be no sword problem. I'm worthy of 3 swords. If there were a sword strip, a sheath for that sword. Now Olaf is very impressed. He should be impressed. That's quite nice. And as a reward, he gives Hallfred a sheath for the sword that he gave him a while back.
Hallfred gets away with that poem?
Yeah.
What about the 7th line? We're just going to accept that sward strip is close enough?
Well, he gets points for clever wordplay, I suppose. Isn't sward another word for turf, though?
Yeah.
It sounds like sword.
He's making a reference to the peace arch that was made from turf and used to seal friendship. We saw something similar being made in Gisli Saga, remember?
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, a sheath is like a peace arch. And so there you go. It's all good.
No, there I don't go. I can't believe he got away with that.
Hey, linguistically, they are, what do you call those? They sound the same. They're, Are they homonym?
Homophones.
Homophones. Anyway. So, whatever. Anyway. Things are still unsettled in Olaf's court, with Kaf accusing Hallfred of secretly maintaining his pagan faith. And to get Hallfred out of the way and force him to prove his Christian faith, Olaf sends him to Uppland to blind Thorleif the Wise, who has refused to convert. The bastard.
I must have missed the Sunday school class that covered blinding those who refuse the faith.
Yeah, Olaf's got a quirky style to his Christianity.
Hallfred's also a little skeptical about this approach to religious debate, but he rides to Thorleif's farm anyway. Mm-hmm. He attempts a bit of subterfuge, claiming to be a wanderer who ran away from Olaf's court to avoid converting. Thorleif almost immediately figures him out, and the two of them fight. And in the struggle, Hallfred manages to gouge out one of Thorleif's eyes.
I really liked this scene. And what I really like about it is that Thorleif seems to take the loss of one eye pretty well.
He does, actually. All he asks is that Hallfred leave him the other eye in exchange for gifts.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
Right. But Hallfred doesn't want to be bribed into betraying Olaf's trust. So he spares Thorleif anyway, but on his own responsibility. And the two men part as friends.
Now, you'd think that people would notice that Thorleif still got one eye.
Well, Hallfred's got a plan for that, too.
Of course he does.
He makes a detour by way of Kalf's farm on the way back, and rips one of Kalf's eyes out.
Is it really that easy to pull someone's eye out? Hallfred's really good at this. He must have practiced.
I have no idea. There's probably a technique to it that we don't know about.
It's all in the wrists, you know. You gotta just a flick of the wrist.
You know. Anyway, Hallfred presents Kalf and Thorleif's eyes to Olaf and admits that he attacked Kalf.
Yeah.
Maybe the eyes are different colors or something as a bit of a giveaway. Olaf lets the incident go, though, and he's reasonably pleased with events. And presumably he adds the eyes to his collection.
He's got a collection, a nice little necklace of eyes that he wears.
As I said, his Christianity is a bit different than what I'm accustomed to.
Well, pretty soon, Hallfred gets restless and he begins traveling again. He falls in with an elderly trader named Aldgisel, and the two of them begin a dangerous overland trip with a pack of mules. I don't think we see mules all that often in the sagas.
No, it's true.
Nice to see some mules. They meet a large man named Onund in the mountains, and the three of them travel together for a day before stopping at an empty hut.
Now, I know that listeners may be getting confused because there's sort of a lot of different stories going on here. Mm-hmm. Hallfred just kind of has these episodic adventures. But this one to me is this is the premise of like every bad horror film from like the late 90s. You know, a group of people stop at the end of the day by an empty hut in the woods.
Well, it doesn't take long for the horror to start. Onund kills Aldgisel and then attacks Hallfred. But his axe blow bounces off a blade Hallfred happens to have slung over his back, and the two men fight, and after praying to Olaf's Christian god, Hallfred overpowers Onund and runs him through with a sword. I wonder why he didn't take his eyes out.
Well, he's operating on his own recognizance here.
Oh, okay.
The eyes are strictly something he does on spec.
Okay.
In this case, so Hallfred now finally embraces Christianity and kills another guy. It's actually not that horrifying.
No, not at all. But it's at least over. Oh, it's not over.
No, it's not over.
It's not over at all. Hallfred locks himself into the hut.
You don't say.
And all night long, Onund's corpse bangs on the door and the walls trying to get in.
Ah, okay, that's better.
Yeah, so like the Army of Darkness.
Sure, exactly. Right, just like that.
Yeah, just like it. A little more horrifying.
Now, this is actually something that we see a lot of. Saga writers seem to use the undead as a way of highlighting the chaos of the pre-Christian world. I also think it's in part an articulation of a kind of unease about the fate of the pagan dead in a Christianized land. That's
true. Well, in this case, Hallfred has to keep the door blocked until sunrise, when the corpse vanishes and then he can escape. Though not until he's taken the knife and belt away from Aldgisel's body.
So Hallfred's on his own again.
Well, there's Christ behind him, of course.
Right,
but
sure,
yes,
fair enough.
Yes, he is. He eventually meets a red-bearded woodcutter named Bjorn, who invites him to spend the night. Oh, and the beginning of another horror movie.
These woods are just rife with premises for horror films.
After his last experience, Hallfred's a little suspicious, naturally.
Rightly so.
And so he waits in hiding in the bed closet that night, which is hilarious to imagine. Sure enough, Bjorn sneaks in and stabs the bed where he thinks Hallfred is lying, and Hallfred leaps out and kills him. That's where Tolkien gets the idea, right?
Right, there you go. Yeah. And I've noticed a pattern here. Everyone wants to kill Hallfred.
Well, you can add Bjorn's wife to the list. She she's angry about her husband's death, which I guess makes sense. And when the men of the farmstead capture Hallfred, she sends for the local Gothi, who agrees that Hallfred should be killed.
Yeah, I mean, technically they sentence him to be sacrificed.
Wait, can I just ask, is he tied up again?
Yes. I believe he is.
He spends
a lot of time in bondage.
Wow. All right.
So I think this is another dig by the author at pagan-era morals, right? They're going to sacrifice him. But fortunately for Hallfred, the Gothi's daughter is Ingebjorg, the wife of Hallfred's fallen friend Audgisel.
Oh boy. See, if you haven't been taking notes, you're probably lost. But if you have, you know exactly what's going on here.
Right. So in other words, the man who Hallfred lost in that first horror movie, is going to, or the wife.
See, you're even having trouble explaining it.
Hang on. So, to make it simpler, the wife of the man who died in the first horror movie is now going to save Hallfred from the consequences of his actions in the second horror movie.
Yeah, that makes it much clearer.
There you go.
Thank you.
When Hallfred identifies himself as the avenger of Audgisel's death, he's released into her custody.
Okay.
Yes, and since avenging a widow's dead husband is apparently some kind of foreplay in this saga, they immediately fall in love, and despite their religious differences, get married.
What? This has got to be the weirdest element of the saga, and I completely forgot that happened. Yeah. Hallfred refused to marry his supposed great love, and now he's marrying some random pagan widow? I mean, is the author just having trouble remembering that Kolfinna's in the saga, or what's going on here?
It does seem strange, but as you've said, this is a saga that's really more about the conversion era and the relationship between Hallfred and Olaf than it is about the love, supposedly, between Hallfred and Kolfinna.
Yeah. But marrying a pagan woman just makes this all even more complicated to me.
That's true, and Hallfred seems not to have taken up the Christian faith completely.
Yeah.
His only religious observance, we're told, is making the sign of the cross over his cup before drinking. But even that, there may be a practical reason for doing that.
And this isn't something to do with transubstantiation miracle, is it? Or maybe he's just wiping flies away?
No, I think it's supposed to protect him from poison.
Oh.
A number of saints' lives include episodes in which a saint crosses a poisoned cup, which is then either purified or, in some cases, explodes.
Explodes? You're exaggerating, right? It maybe shatters or something.
No, I like the idea of a saint's life filmed by Michael Bay. Do away with all that spiritual depth and allegory, and replace it with good-looking people and lots of stuff blowing up.
Who needs moving religious narrative when you can have extra explosions?
Well, yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, the crossing works, I guess, in that Hallfred is never poisoned. But after a few years, he does have a dream in which King Olaf scolds him for neglecting his faith. So Hallfred and Ingebjorg and their 2-year-old son Audgisel. Oh, what a nice name.
Let's just make the point here that that Hallfred now has been in this land for a long time. He's got a 2-year-old son with this woman.
Yeah. And they named their son after the guy that was killed, who brought Ingebjorg and Hallfred together.
There you go.
Quite nice.
There is a romance in this story after all.
There you go. Lovely. Audgisel and his parents travel to Olaf's court in Norway, where Ingebjorg gives birth to a second son named Hallfred for his father, and Hallfred Sr. composes a drapa, that is a praise poem of the Christian version of creation, which is meant to appease Olaf.
So everyone's happy.
Yeah, sure. Not for long. That winter, Ingebjorg dies.
Oh, I had a feeling that wasn't going to last.
Against me, Frey and Freya will bear fury, and the mighty Thor. Last year I left off Njord's deceit. Let fiends ask mercy of Grimnir. From Christ alone will I beg all love, and from God. Hateful to me is the sun's anger. Under the Father of Earth, he holds famous sway. So Hallfred decides to visit Iceland, to take his mind off of his grief. He finds foster homes for his sons, and heads out. Wouldn't it be nice to be a father in Iceland? You're just like,
just drop your kids off the nearest farm and say,
my wife's dead.
Send them when they're 18.
I want to see the world a little bit. I'll find someone, yeah. It seems like how that happens a lot in the Middle Ages.
Right.
Watch my son.
And of course,
do they just leave him in like a little buggy next to the house? Knock on the door.
No, they. What I think is funny is that he leaves his sons with sort of nary a word, but then we have this sort of big emotional scene with Olaf where he leaves.
Yeah, he gives him gifts to carry with him. Oh wait, yeah.
So it's finally time for Hallfred to go back to Iceland and see Kolfinna again.
Well, in fact, Hallfred and his men ride directly to Kolfinna and Gris's farm. where this is weird too, John.
Yeah,
his wife just dies. And so it occurs to him, oh yeah, I've got that woman back in Iceland.
The woman that the saga says I'm supposed to be in love with.
Yeah. I remember when I was kissing with her when she was getting engaged. Yeah. Anyway. They are greeted at the farm by Kolfinna and several other women. So Hallfred and Kolfinna end up in bed together, as one does. In one of the farm's outbuildings. It didn't take long at all. Clearly she remembers him. Hallfred recites several insulting verses about Gris, which he claims Kolfinna must have written. The verses claim that Gris is a sweating, stinking, ugly klutz in bed, and Kolfinna is suffering greatly from having to put up with him. And also that Gris is probably happier committing acts of bestiality in his barn than sleeping with his wife, which, could be true. Scarcely will the white fellow stride, helmet slicing by the pantry. He will go without the ire of coins, nor the grey dog strut, though the scythe shover, unlovely, has a wide milking shed and a long sheep pen. The sword plains keeper enjoys his livestock.
Now, okay, any one of those would be a killing insult, and collectively, it's about as bad as you're ever going to see.
Yeah.
But, of course, Kolfinna is not happy with him for causing trouble. In the morning, Hallfred and his men ride away just before Gris arrives, and Kolfinna refuses Hallfred's attempt to placate her with a gift before he goes.
Yeah. The gift, by the way, is the cloak that Hallfred got from King Olaf a while back. But we didn't talk about him getting a cloak, did we?
No.
But he did get a cloak for those who haven't read the saga.
And, of course, this is one of those motifs within the poet sagas. Some of you might remember that Helga the Fair in Gunnlaug's saga mooned over a cloak Gunnlaug had given her until she finally died of a broken heart.
Yeah. It's instructive to read this group of sagas back to back like this. You definitely get a sense that there's a source text or a tradition that they're all accessing. Mm-hmm. But here again, they're aware of each other in some way.
Right, absolutely. But here again, the author of Hallfred's saga is kind of playing with this motif a little bit in that Kolfinna just rejects the gift completely. Mm-hmm. Now when Gris arrives at the outbuilding, he sees that Kolfinna is upset, and he rides out after Hallfred, bringing his cousin Einar Thorisson with him. They chase Hallfred's party down and catch them midway across a river.
Let me guess, does he tie him up again?
No, Gris isn't wasting any time. This time he throws a spear at Hallfred without saying a word.
Oh, I do like a man of action.
No. But unfortunately for Gris, Hallfred catches the spear and throws it back. And Gris's cousin Einar is killed.
Of course.
Now, there are some taunts from both sides, but there's no further violence at that point.
It's interesting that we're told here that the people gathered there, they start pressuring Hallfred to compensate Gris for the dishonors he's received. It seems almost like popular opinion begins turning against Hallfred at this point.
Yeah, no, I think so. Especially when he refuses flat out to compensate Gris and rides away.
Well, why should he compensate him?
No, fair enough.
The next attack occurs the following spring, as Hallfred is riding back from his brother's farm and a blizzard kicks up. Hallfred believes the storm was called up by sorcery, as any Christian would. And whether that's true or not, it provides cover for 20 men led by Gris's old friend Mar of Mostadr. And they try to attack Hallfred's party.
Yeah, this is just a weird moment.
Yeah. Mar attacks with a sacrificial trough. What?
Sure.
Which seemingly makes no sense at all for an ambush weapon, And
Not seemingly. I think it makes no sense at all, but yes.
No. How about you? After one exchange of blows, the two sides separate, and Hallfred taunts Mar with a verse, and both parties ride away.
Great, but why? What's going on?
Well, I mean...
The saga is so confusing.
I'm just gonna guess. This episode is added to the saga in order to justify the verse Hallfred speaks. The verse includes a reference to Mar being better off licking the inside of his sacrificial trough than attacking Hallfred. So maybe we have a poet, or the author of this thing has a poem that survived and...
But there's no suggestion in the poem that the trough has to be present at the time that the poem is spoken.
Yeah, I have to agree. I'm not saying it's a good reason, it's just a reason, that's what I think.
Alright, fair enough.
Alright.
Hallfred's verse making is increasingly a problem, that much is obvious. Gris hears that Hallfred's continuing to mock him with verses, and summons Hallfred to the local thing on the advice of his Gothi Hunrad. Hallfred and his brother Galti respond by asking their uncle, Thorkel Scratcher, for support. He agrees to support them, and to arbitrate if both sides are willing.
Yeah. Have we seen Thorkel Scratcher before?
Yeah, he should.
I thought so. But there's treachery afoot, of course. Hallfred's behavior toward Kolfina has angered her family, and as Hallfred and Galti leave Thorkel's booth, Kolfina's brother Brand attacks them and kills Galti before escaping. And I'll point out here, now that we're back in Iceland, we've got tons of names flowing again, because maybe we could think about why that's happening. It's Iceland, the Icelandic narrative anyway, is all about community, isn't it? About how these individuals work in these tight communities. And so it's not surprising that we run into so many names, but boy, it can be confusing.
And of course, the genealogical connections of the audience for the sagas and the participants in the story, right? That the more kind of cameos you put in from known names and known ancestors, the wider a swath of 13th century Iceland you're going to be appealing to.
Yeah. So again, read them with a pen in hand and a little note paper so you can keep track of these things.
They all eventually come together. So but anyways, in this particular case, we have, Brand's sort of actions here, they're pretty audacious.
Yeah, they are.
We've seen assassinations carried out at things before. If you remember the sons of Vestin Vestinson killing Thorkel Surson in Gisli Saga, for example.
Sure.
But this feels almost spontaneous. Brand's entire exit strategy is to run back to Griss's booth, even though Hallfred got a good look at him.
And sure enough, Hallfred and Thorkel Scratcher rush to Griss's booth, where they threaten to besiege the booth if Brand isn't given up.
Yeah, and there's a great moment here where Brand's mother Hilda confronts Thorkel and reminds him of the time that she sheltered him from the Avengers of Gladir.
Yeah, and that's a long story from Vatnsdala Saga, but the upshot is that Hilda's quite right. Thorkel was probably justified in killing Gladir, but he still owes her his life for hiding him.
Right, but in this case, Thorkel nevertheless pushes ahead with demanding Brand. But he and Hallfred allow the women to leave the booth first, and Brand sneaks out, hidden in a woman's cloak.
They come right out of the booth.
The booth.
This is something that we see in other places, in other sagas, right?
Yeah, the one, of course, that first comes to mind is the famous burning of Njal's farm in Njal's Saga, when Njal's son Helgi attempts to escape disguised in a woman's cloak. It's clear in that context that Helgi is convinced by his wife to make the attempt, and there's a clear indication that this isn't exactly warriorly behavior.
Warriorly behavior. That's pretty clear here as well, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we're meant
warriorly.
Yes, I don't think we're meant to applaud Brand for hiding behind his mom and then sneaking out of the booth in disguise. But in any case, once he realizes he's been outmaneuvered, Hallfred immediately challenges Griss to a duel.
Finally, here we go. Listeners who are caught up on this podcast will have heard all about the Icelandic duel in our last saga brief, so we'll only explain this briefly.
And those that haven't listened to that episode yet have only themselves to blame.
Okay. So the essence is that once the duel's been challenged and accepted, there are a bunch of protocols that kick in. One of the most important ones is that there's a 3-day waiting period for the two sides to sort out the details, appoint witnesses, seconds, and arbitrators, and for everyone else to try to talk them out of it.
Right, but these two have been circling around each other for a while now, and nothing's going to stop them from finally having their day of reckoning. Let's go. It's clobbering time.
Not exactly.
No.
Boy, it's such a mislead.
It really is.
The night before the duel, Hallfred has a dream in which he's visited by his old friend, King Olaf Tryggvason, who tells him three things. That Hallfred is in the wrong and God will favor Griss. That Hallfred must submit and pay compensation to Griss. And that Hallfred should ride out in the morning to a crossroads where he will meet men with important news for him.
It's so frustrating. Why are these Skald sagas always undermining their own climactic moments? Is it too much to ask for one lousy duel in this thing?
I know. Of course, it's true that Hallfred's pretty clearly the instigator in this situation, but in this circumstance, calling off the feud is almost worse for him than going ahead with it and getting killed, right? Everyone's going to think that he's afraid of Griss. In fact, when he tells a friend about his dream the next morning, his friend accuses him of cowardice.
Right, but of course, Hallfred doesn't have time to defend himself. He's got to go follow the third part of the dream and meet the travelers at the crossroads.
Yeah, it's a good thing he does, because the news is quite huge. Hallfred learns the news about the Battle of Svolder and the death of his friend King Olaf. I mean, this news
now, not to undermine the significance of that, but this is another thing that drives me nuts. So, Olaf can show up in Hallfred's dream and make him call off the duel, but he can't just go ahead and tell him the news about his death?
No.
That seems like the first thing he should be mentioning. Hi, Hallfred, I'm dead now. By the way, don't fight Grizz in the morning.
That's your ghost Olaf voice?
Not spooky enough?
No, not at all. My bones are thoroughly chilled. Yeah, I think we'll save the explanation of the Battle of Svolder for the judgment section, but for now it's important to note that this moment ties Hallfred's saga into a much larger narrative about the conversion of Scandinavia.
Yeah, I don't think we've mentioned it, but listeners may remember Olaf from Eric's saga as the Norwegian king who deputized Leif Erikson to convert the Greenland colonies. He's really the engine behind a lot of the Christian expansion in this time.
Mm-hmm. And since we know that the Battle of Svolder takes place in 1000, we're also right alongside the Icelandic conversion. So this assertion of the divine interest in the outcome of Hallfred's duel is happening at the same time that Iceland is accepting Christianity, due in large part to the pressure that was coming from Olaf himself.
Right. And of course, Hallfred's devastated by the news of Olaf's death,
Yeah.
since their bromance is really the center of the saga.
Yeah.
But before he can leave for Norway, he has to settle things with Gris and deal with the damage to his reputation.
Right. And somewhat predictably, everyone's mocking Hallfred for backing out of the duel.
Right. Now, everyone but Gris, that is.
Yeah. It turns out that Gris sympathizes with Hallfred's sorrow over the loss of Olaf. He insists that everyone stop making fun of Hallfred, makes a gracious speech about being relieved he doesn't have to fight the duel, and turns the dispute over to Thorkel Scratcher for settlement.
So, Gris turns out to be the nicest person in the saga?
Kind of, yeah.
That actually makes sense. These poet saga writers seem to really revel in choosing jerks to star in their stories.
Well, it's not like Gris totally lets Hallfred off the hook. Thorkel Scratcher is asked to make the judgment in this case, and when all the offenses are tallied up, Hallfred is required to pay a significant fine for making verses about Gris and Kolfina.
Yeah, and even then he can't resist making a snide poem about having to pay Gris, and still wishing he could have Kolfina. Thorkel actually has to step in at that point and tell him to shut up.
You'd think he'd have learned by now.
No, yeah, you think so, but no. Hallfred is remarkably resistant to lessons.
So, now that's the end of the feud, but Hallfred's still going strong. He travels to Norway, where he composes a long drapa about King Olaf, and then hears about Olaf's enemy, Earl Eric, being in the area. He's still grieving for Olaf, so he makes plans to try to kill Eric in revenge.
Right, but of course Olaf shows up in his dreams again to tell him not to do it.
What a nice
and
guy.
instead, to compose a poem for Eric and become his friend.
So, according to this saga, Christians get to become Obi-Wan Kenobi when they die?
I guess. But only special Christians.
Okay.
Olaf's practically a saint.
Use the kennings, Hallfred. Trust your feelings.
I think that is officially our first Star Wars reference on this show.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think it's our first one. I think you've done that before.
Really? Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
It's disappointing.
I think the first time you did it, I was shocked and appalled.
And now here you are joining in the fun.
Ah, well, can't help it.
Anyway, telling Hallfred to trust his feelings is actually really terrible advice. The next day, he tries to see Earl Eric, but the Earl wants him put to death for gouging out the eye of Thorleif the Wise.
Oops.
Remember that from back when? Thorleif's one of Eric's followers, and so Eric tries to have fetters put on Hallfred.
Oh, tie him up again.
Right, except that this time, Hallfred decides he's been chained up enough in the saga, and so he goes on the attack and kills the first man to approach him.
Yeah, it's never a good idea to be the first nameless guard to try to shackle the hero.
It's true. That's like story survival 101 right there.
Yeah.
Don't be the red shirt. So Hallfred's about to die.
But no, because the one-eyed Thorleif the Wise speaks up from one of the benches, and he asks that Hallfred's life is spared.
But why? Hallfred plucked his eye out.
Well, yeah, but he left him the other one. That's very generous.
Well, gratitude's a matter of perspective, I guess. Although I would imagine perspective's harder to figure out when you only have one eye.
He bumped into him when he was trying to get up there.
There you go.
So in order to save Hallfred's life, Thorleif negotiates a settlement between him and the Earl. Hallfred has to compose a poem about the Earl within 3 days.
Of course, if he'd listened to Olaf Wan Kenobi, he could have just done that in the first place. But now we've got a head price poem, which is a great bit of saga weirdness. Do you want to explain this, or should I?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. As we've seen already, poets have a tendency to shoot their mouths off. And this isn't the only time that a poet has to essentially pay for their mouthing off by composing a complimentary poem for the local ruler. And the most famous example, of course, is Egil Skallagrimsson's head price poem for Eric Bloodaxe.
Right, but in that case, we get the entire poem as part of the saga.
Yeah.
Here, we just get the opening lines. You are worthy to hear an ode, war valiant one, wrought for you. And that's it.
That's kind of a little bit disappointing.
Apparently, we're not worthy to hear.
No. Well, maybe
poem.
It's all that survived, you know? It's quite possible that we only had a fragment or something. But presumably the rest of it's really good since Earl Eric rewards him for the poem and lets him go. So it's a shame we don't get to hear it.
Well, It's actually possible that this whole episode made the author a little uncomfortable. I mean,
why is that?
Hallfred, at this moment, is essentially sucking up to the guy who killed his lord and beloved friend. Diana Whaley suggests that the dream with Olaf telling Hallfred to compose a poem for Eric is the author's device for explaining what is otherwise kind of a despicable shifting of Hallfred's allegiances.
Well, he's just doing what Olaf told him to do, though, right?
Right, well, with that dream in place, yeah, it sort of justifies his subsequent actions.
Yeah, so we can't really blame him too much. But yeah, it does look a little bit shady from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's it.
If you remove the magic dream,
Yeah. We're done, though, right? This is the end of the saga.
No. You know better than that.
Yeah, I do. It's always that way, though, isn't it? This is the end. No, it's not. This thing has more false endings than The Return of the King.
Were you just waiting for that line to land?
I think there was a...
Bazing!
Hallfred's going to sail around for a while again. He's quite the wanderer. And he gets into a disagreement with a neighbor in Iceland. Does he ever live in Iceland? What's this?
Yeah.
Anyway, he gets into a disagreement with a neighbor in Iceland over half a mark of silver. Quite a lot of money. The neighbor is a farmhand of Onund of Mossfell, whose son, Hrafn the Skald, we already know was the antagonist of Gunnlaug's saga.
Yeah, we actually heard about this episode briefly in that saga, and there's not much to it, really.
No. Hrafn forces Hallfred to pay the farmhand twice what he owes him, and the whole thing is settled. It's mainly significant only because shortly after this, Hallfred gives Gunnlaug a lift to Iceland and warns him about not underestimating Hrafn.
We banished those two in our last episode, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't seem to have impressed them much, though. Besides, this is happening at the same time as their saga, so they haven't quite been outlawed yet.
See, this is why time travel movies make my head hurt.
All right, let's try to wrap this thing up.
Okay, no. We're still not quite done.
Seriously?
Hallfred sails around the north for years.
Of course he
does.
But
he can't shake his sadness over Olaf's death.
He's pining in the fjords.
That's right. He's pining in the fjords. For his lost friend.
He's pining for his lost friend, Olaf.
Yes.
The saga writer's really playing with this idea of the star-crossed lover of the other poet sagas. But it's an interesting dynamic, especially as the shift occurs over the course of the saga.
It's true. I mean, at this point, there's been no mention of Kolfinna for a while. And apart from an oblique reference in Hallfred's final verse, we're done with her.
Yeah.
Hallfred's heart is breaking, just as Helga's did in Gunnlaug's saga, but it's for a different sort of lost love.
It's really interesting that the saga, his relationship with Kolfinna, the saga author emphasizes the physical aspect of it. It's lust, and it, and at that moment, he's a pagan, right? At all those moments, he's pagan or he's turned from his Christianity. But the true Hallfred, the Christian Hallfred, the concept of love is quite different, and it has nothing to do with physicality or lust or anything like that. It's more of a refined and intellectual kind of love, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, actually.
It's cool.
Yeah,
cool.
No, it's he sort of learns what real love is, and it's this kind of Christian fellowship, right? That is not about sex; it's about feeling.
Yeah. I want to know what love is. This is a song he sang
Olaf to show me.
I want Olaf to show me. Anyway. But I'm going to pull the plug here because all that happens in the final section is that Hallfred eventually succumbs to his depression while sailing, and when he's knocked into the bottom of his boat by a rogue wave, he dies.
Well, okay, wait, but not before passing his Fylgja onto his son Hallfred. Can we at least talk about that?
That's not fair.
Well, let's be quick about it.
Okay, so this Fylgja is a spirit creature. Sometimes an animal, sometimes person-shaped, who accompanies a person. In Scandinavian context, they're nearly always female.
Yeah, I mean, they're usually called fetches in English translations, but that really doesn't capture their role. Fetches are more like spirit doubles of a person, like a ghost doppelganger. Fylgjur are more like manifestations of a person's fate or luck.
Yeah.
Usually, they can only be seen when their person is facing his or her death.
Which, of course, is exactly what's happening here, right? But what's up with his passing his Fylgja onto his son?
Well, he's got to leave the kid something besides his name.
Oh, yeah. Somehow Hallfredason also ends up with the nickname Troublesome-Poet.
Oh, yeah, true.
We totally forgot. It's in the name of the saga. I think the writer's just being unclear on purpose up to this point.
That's entirely possible. When you look at other sources for Hallfred's life, there's actually no reference to a son named Hallfred. This is just a bit of artistic license on the author's part.
But it also makes the whole Fugya, spirit luck, ghost woman thing much more interesting. I mean, this son is probably invented by the author, is given Hallfred's name and nickname, and ends up taking on Hallfred's fate ghost. Is this just a doubling of Hallfred himself?
You mean like Looper style? This is a past version of Hallfred that has to confront his dying self in order to inherit his Fugya and fulfill his own destiny?
Yeah, I guess so. That's it.
Okay, because that's an awesome idea. I want to see a movie of that.
Yeah, with Bruce Willis. No, I thought you said you hate time travel movies. Did you say they hurt your head?
I'll make an exception to see Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis as dueling Hallfreds. That would be awesome.
Oh, I see. So anyway, there's this short coda in which Hallfred's body washes up on shore in the Hebrides, and it's treated rather poorly. Some servants from nearby monastery steal his grave goods, but St. Olaf appears to chastise the monastery's abbot, and the goods are returned.
So now Olaf is appearing in other men's dreams?
Yeah.
The force is strong in that one.
Okay, we've got to be done with the cheap Star Wars references.
Cheap? How dare you? Besides, you started it.
And that's the end of our story.
Oh, good. I'm really looking forward to laying some judgments on this saga.
Well, you'll just have to wait a little bit longer. Trying to make sense out of Hallfred's career has taken a bit longer than we'd hoped, which is something we say at the end of every summary section.
It pretty much is, yes.
So we're going to be posting this in 2 parts.
Another one of these.
Yep. Sorry about that, guys.
Well, it gives you saga lovers out there who have read Hallfred's saga time to come up with your own judgments before you hear what we have to say.
Are you assigning homework now?
Sorry. It's the start of the school year. I can't help it.
But in the meantime, you can check our full list of episodes at sagathingpodcast.wordpress.com, our blog site. You can go to our Facebook page or our Twitter account. You already know the address, but it has something to do with Saga Thing. And of course, remember to rate and review us on iTunes.
Until next time, thanks for listening, and bye for now.
See you later. Well, let me just hit the button here.